What is up, everybody, and welcome back to That Dan Band Show. We are a little bit over a week out from the 2022 Winter Guard International Percussion Advisory Board meetings in Vegas. This is an annual event where directors and designers across all indoor winds, percussion, guard classes come together and we discuss the year's proposals and we kind of do an overall assessment of the state of the activity in general. This is always super fun. It always is informative and it can definitely get heated. So I always enjoy that part of it. That being said, my guest today is highly relevant within these discussions of the state of the activity. Not only is he a consistent member of the Percussion Steering Committee, he's one of the pioneers of WGI percussion visual design and program design. This person is an OG that broke through and led the activity around, I would say, several large corners, pushing the boundaries of what drumlines could do and say. His designs with Rhythm X are broadly considered some of the most progressive, memorable, and effective ever. My personal favorites include Gone and the Razor's Edge. I've been super lucky to have been taught by this person at Rhythm X in 11 and 12. And since then, he has served as a major inspiration to what I do and become a personal friend. Everyone, please help me welcome Tim Fairbanks. Tim, what's up? You're on a podcast tour.
Hey, all right. Thank you. That's quite the introduction. I appreciate that. Glad to be here, Dan.
No problem at all. It's super cool seeing you kind of get out there. Hey, Gus, stop that. What are you doing? Crazy?
What's up, Gus?
Yeah, he's jingling back there trying to lay down. It's been super cool seeing you kind of, step out and go, I want to involve myself in public-facing conversations around the activity. As someone who has been in that winner's circle, obviously, in some of the years I mentioned, and then some I haven't yet, I think it's important that people like you are like, hey, I want to allow people to hear what I have to say from my perspective, because many people never do unless they are in that advisory board setting. So it's super cool that you're kind of stepping out and wanting to do that. So I appreciate you getting on here in general. And I want to start with kind of our conversation that we maybe started yesterday a little bit or before that, just kind of around process. If there's anything that I talk about most when it comes to the experience marching Rhythm X, and what I took away from it was the relationship between your guys' implementation design process and then how that's sort of the educational tool at work that you don't feel. When you are asking players of a certain level to do things that are kind of at a different speed or a different level of integration, it does something. So can you just maybe, I don't know, I want to ask you to just discuss that process because it's so broad, but at Rhythm X, was it always like that where it's like, we're really going to like push what a high player can do from like a speed standpoint? And when I talk about speed, I mean like body, movement, drill, music, like the way that you all change things in that organic fashion. Was it always like that? Did it develop with the current team with Tim and Andrew? Talk a little bit about that.
Okay. So it's funny. Rhythm X's process is unique. I've done a number of clinics. I did a really well-attended clinic at PASIC one year, which was funny. A little sidebar on that, because the clinic was about how to put together a show, an indoor show. In PASIC at the time, this was 10 or 15 years ago, they weren't like super cool with WGI. And so they wanted me to do this clinic. I said yes. And I'm in this huge hall. I think it must have held like 1,000 people. And it's maybe 9 minutes until it's about to start. And my sponsors were there, the people that were helping, me financially be there, and maybe like 3 people in this entire cavern of space. And I'm like dying inside. I'm like, this is going to be the biggest failure at the pace it's ever seen. And then like I didn't think about how their schedule goes, and down the hallway in an auditorium, like Dave Wackel or somebody got done with their clinic, and then it was like, and all of a sudden it was like standing room only. And the clinic was awesome. Like I had a great time, but I very vividly remember that feeling of like this is going down in flames hard. But that clinic was all about how to put a show together.
Yeah.
And if I had to say that Rhythm X did anything that I said in that clinic, I would be lying. We don't do anything that I recommend people do. So that process does change every year. It depends on, you asked, has it always been like that? I would say yeah, at least since I've been involved. The idea that what's out there can change at any time, and the process especially. I have kind of a catchphrase at Centerville that's called improving the process. They hashtag ITP all the time. And I really firmly believe that whatever the process is that you're doing, it can always be improved. So our process there does change year to year. Sometimes it's crazy. Sometimes it's, like one of the years that you marched, we changed like 70 sets of drill in the last week of the season.
Yeah.
And it was, I just couldn't put it out there if it wasn't what I really believed the show could be.
Right.
And I think that we maybe didn't play quite as well as we possibly could have, but we ended up winning visual. So it's kind of do you want your product to be the exact thing that you want it to be or not? And you have to make those decisions.
Right. So it's interesting too, because X is one of those groups with that super top tier talent, and it's maybe just where y'all are at in your journey or whatever, but it's like you're already drawing the top level talent. There's really not many, groups that I would say there's none that are like substantially higher level. Maybe, every year it's like this group's quad line is stacked, this group's baseline is stacked, whatever. But y'all are always in that conversation of talent. And then I remember distinctly, like, doing my first year of tour and being like, oh, that was like pretty tough. Like not, it's Cavaliers, so like physically not tough, but like, the psychological part of it and like doing it and being in a show and trying to make it clean or whatever. And then I remember coming to X and doing Rhythm X 11, which is what you're just talking about when we changed. We've not only changed, I think like, 70% or 70 sets of the drill, what have you. I was actually late coming finals week because I had a engagement in Philly and came back and they were like, yeah, we rewrote basically like movements 2, 3, and 4. I was like, that's funny. It's like, no, like legit, you're about to relearn the whole show in 2 days, which we 100% did, which is, I think that's like a legendary thing now for the people that were there. But I remember like doing that year and just being like, oh my God, what is going on? Like, what really is this? And then kind of, whirlwind type of experience, which I'm sure resonates. And then I remember going back to Cavaliers in 11 and I was like, this is the easiest thing on earth. Like, just keeping like, and they would experiment with the design. I mean, that team, like they have the same probably fundamental belief that you do about putting the program together, but it was like, it was just the day to day. It was like so much easier. And then of course, when you come back as a vet at Rhythm X, you're like at a completely different kind of place because you know what to expect. But when you're teaching, are you like standing there going like, I know what I'm saying is ridiculous, but I'm going to push them anyway? Because I always remember you as a teacher who was really always upholding that standard of what you could do, regardless of how kind of ridiculous the ask was.
Yeah, the ask is the easy part. Having students that are willing to respond to that and just say yes. I try to inspire that. Sometimes you have to inspire things for people, make them change to your will. And the idea of, I'm going to ask you to do this thing and you're just going to try it. And you won't say, raise your hand and say, I don't think I can do this. That's just not going to cut it. So you learn that real fast at Centerville or at Rhythm X. I call it the culture of change. Like you have to be prepared to change things on the fly and think quickly. I've had some experiences where I'll take my process to other places where I don't teach the kids every day. and they haven't had all those little mini lectures that are training them to be agile and mobile,
Right.
mentally. And I'll be like, all right, snares, can you guys just go to the left this time instead of go to the right? And it's just a train wreck. And the texts are like, we need subs time and we need time to work on this. I'm like, bro, I just said go to the left. Like that was not a hard thing. But you have to make that happen. And we found that like Centerville, for example, that culture of change in the indoor season is really, really important. And then because of the cymbal line and the VE, which is almost always horn line members, they then take that culture of change back out to the rest of the band. And we find that when we ask them to make a change in the fall, they're much more agile and able to do that than they were previous to their experience in indoor drumline.
It's like you're training them to do a thing that they can only be trained like through. I mean, it's like that where you can't just stand there and be like, I think that's a component is the coaching of we need to be a type of group with this mindset, right? And there is like a verbal coaching, but the reality is like, I think the biggest takeaway for me was like, you were just like, hey, like do this thing. It's not that hard. It was like almost like your personality.
Yeah, the not that hard part. Yeah, the not that hard part is one of my psychological tricks. Like I never say to my students ever, like, all right, this is going to be hard, but I think that you can do it. Right. I'm always like, this is going to be something you'll probably get it on the first rep, maybe the second rep, whether I know that is going to be false or not.
Yeah.
And then also they have to know that if they fail or they don't succeed on the first two reps, then I'm not going to yell at them. And that the tech staff is not going to yell at them. Because that's how kids get scared. They want all the information. They want to get spoon fed every single thing so that there's no chance that they can make a mistake because they don't want to get yelled at or they don't want to get in trouble. And I have established a level of trust with my students that I don't care if you fail 10 times in a row. If it's something that I'm asking you to do, we're trying to push your boundaries and you're not going to get yelled at. Now, if you do know the skill and you've succeeded at it many times and now you're failing, that's a different story. But when we're asking you to do the new thing, it's a safe space.
I like that. I feel like I've been trying to, I mean, personally and with the people around me also, in those moments of experimentation, not cast judgment on a lot of what's behind it. I think sometimes we see or hear things for the first time and it's not perfect and we're like, this doesn't work or something. And it's like, let's not, let's not design ourselves out of creativity because of like our fear that it's not like working right away. Like I think especially at that top level, a lot of those things probably shouldn't work right away. Like they're going to require some time and some crafting and that sort of thing. So I think it's also encompassed. And one thing I wanted to ask you too was it's like a little bit about preparation, but also the process. Like I felt in 16, I saw Tim Jackson and you, I guess, in a more collaborative way where it was like, is Tim Jackson like writing some of the drill and you're like especially in those battery moments or like choreo moments, it felt like it wasn't just like drill design, battery choreo music. Like I almost felt like Tim had a little bit more of that like influence on the drill and then you would come in and maybe like chart it. But how much or like how do you guys prepare when it comes to these moments? Like how much of this is on the fly? How much of it is in Pieware? Because I've seen kind of different variations of this from you, I guess, personally.
Yeah, it depends on the year, and it depends on what our goal is. Like this year with the boxes, we had to do a lot of that in Pieware because you would run into stuff if you didn't. And the boxes needed to know exactly where to go. A lot of the stuff at Stand By Me had to be in Pieware, but especially there, well, and at Centerville, really, I often will chart things live and then notate them in Pieware.
Yeah.
The exceptions are like, I know that I want this crazy thing to happen, but I want it to end up in this solid form. I might chart that solid form out ahead of time in Pieware and then work my way backward to get to it. But I think 16 was the alpha, right?
Yeah.
The Wolf show.
Hmm.
That was how Tim impacts the drill is that we don't really treat it as drill and choreo. It's just all about the movement of their bodies on the floor. And in a show like that, especially where we're trying to get across the character that moves differently than a drummer, um, if they're scampering through the trees, that's not going to feel like a drill set if we want them to feel like they have, a wolf-like texture.
Hmm.
So you were saying like, is it drill? Is it music? Is it choreo? It's like, yeah, it's all those things all at once. And sometimes um, one comes first, sometimes one comes after, but they all have to happen at the same time, essentially.
Right. And I feel like, I guess I would ask, like, how did your drill writing approach change once you brought Tim and Andrew in the fold, and especially Tim, having him be a member that you guys are probably pretty close, and then you bring him in 2008 out of his age out to write. Do you feel like your identity as a drill writer was, I mean, I'm sure it was impacted, but like, how was it impacted when you did bring Tim into the circle of the team?
That's a good question. And yeah, that is when he came on as an '08. Tim and Andrew and I have been together since then. Um, and that trust factor, like I don't think that you can do a lot of the things that we do if you think that the other caption or the other person is gonna. We call it the three-legged stool. Like the three of us, like the stool won't stand up if all three of us don't agree. We also have like the gavel, like you have to gavel something, and all three of us have to gavel it, or it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And we have exclusions to the gavel where if somebody's like, I really, really want to try this, and I know that you two don't think it's going to happen, but give me an hour or give me a block. We say, okay, go ahead and try it. That's usually Tim or me. Andrew's usually more like, I got this shit on lockdown. I already wrote it. It's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Um, and where we like to experiment a little bit more, it's just because it's the visual part of it. Um, what was the question? So how did it change? So one of the things kind of happened concurrently with the way the activity changed is that I think that in the early 2000s, I was much more drilly, where like you could make an effect out of the actual dots and how they moved. And I still do that maybe more than some people, but a lot less than I used to. And a lot of
Mhm.
that came from I know that if I do park them somewhere, that what Tim can do with it can also be an effect and can also be super cool. And I remember a moment in 2010. That was the Inspired show, and uh, it's the moment where Dan Twyford is in the front and he comes up with the one stick, and
Mhm.
then people start jumping over drums and people like start going crazy, and it just builds into this frenzy. That happened on a weekend when I wasn't there. Like I had written the drill, like I had put him in a place, and then I let him play with it, and then I came back and I was like, "Yo, that is really cool.
Mhm.
Thank you. Like, thank you for elevating my visual product into our visual product. That's something that I wouldn't have thought of, and he may not have thought of how to get them there. But between the two of us, it ended up being a really cool moment.
For sure, yeah, and you can tell. I think you guys are really dominating the integrated battery choreo drill kind of ideas with this last year. That felt like a strength with Art Shaped Box. It was like, yeah, this is right on. Like I felt like it was kind of the next installation for that, and this was one of those years. I think y'all in 19, I believe that was the Alinea show. That felt like the tasty year. Y'all were like, you know what, music judges, we're about to give it to you. Like we heard you loud and clear in 18, with the Rarick thing and kind of where he put you guys, and we can talk about that because I do think 18 is a contender to be a gold medal, even though RCC ended up winning that year with the Trumpet Archive show. 18 or 19 rather came out with the sort of menu, textures, flavors, with acoustic effects, which I think was kind of different for you guys. Like I think Rhythm X is in a way a visually oriented indoor drum line. Maybe we could argue about that, but not in a bad way. But I think you guys have strength in your visual creativity. And in 19, it was, my apologies, from 19 to this year, it was more nuts and bolts Rhythm X. It was more like, yo, we're going to hit you with some power, with some athleticism. And it's very like bread and butter Rhythm X. So I don't know if there was I always like see intent especially with you guys, because I marched there, like this is why they're doing what they're doing. But it definitely felt like, yo, we need to like be ourselves and really like max out the product of like what we're best at or something like that.
Yeah, you hit a lot of things in there, so I took a couple notes. One of the things about the movement that Rhythm X does, we try in all aspects of what we ask the students to do to only give them things that we would do. We only put them in costumes that we would wear. And I think a lot of that comes across, that we don't have a guard person come in and do our choreography. And not that there's anything wrong with that. There's plenty of groups that dance really well. I think that we might get some talent that comes to Rhythm X because they know they're not going to put their drums down, and that they like to drum. So, and we're cool with that. Like, we want them to feel cool. We want them to walk into the lot and be like, yo, what's up? We're here. And not like, sorry, I'll be right back. I got to go dance for 30 seconds or a minute and a half. And again, you get visual points for that. So people are very strategic about that. But if you're going to spend 6 months of your life going every single weekend, then you better freaking love it. You better want to be there, both the kids and the staff. So that's how we approach what we give the students most of the time. Your point about giving the judges what they want, that is the eternal question, because we're trying to create this piece of quote unquote art, but it's getting judged competitively. So that was one of the things we really hit on this year about Kurt Cobain and how he struggled with that, with the spotlight. And he wanted to do what he wanted to play, but then he knew that the crowd just wanted to hear and play, Smells Like Teen Spirit, because that's what they paid their money to come see. So do you give what the audience wants? Do you give what the students want? Do you give what the judge wants? You got to try and do all those at the same time. And at least my perspective is we're usually trying to do something that I haven't seen before. So there's a lot of groups, and you can see if you look at the bottom part of Independent World that they watch videos. They watch videos all the time. They're like, well, this group did this and they got points for that, so we need to do a version of that so that we can get points too. We don't watch a ton of videos. I mean, we know what our competitors are doing, but usually our checkpoint is like, yeah, I think I saw that before. All right, that's off the table. We're not doing that. I mean, obviously everybody drums and everybody marches around some, and you got to have marimbas and whatever. But if it's like, I think this event was really cool that I saw X, Y, and Z do last year, let's do our version of that, we would just take that off the table immediately. Like a tightrope walker. Like, I had never seen that. So I wanted to see that. It's like Andrew and I always talk about the old Happy Gilmore quote where the kid draws the blue duck. And it's like, frankly, I've never seen a blue duck before. So we're like, what's our blue duck?
Well, it's a very nice blue duck.
Thanks, Billy. Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. And this is a great segue into that kind of conversation. And I wonder just, it's tough because these younger groups, they see what you guys are doing, or they see what Pulse is doing, or, like next year I foresee a lot of Pulse backwash, right? Whereas over 2020 and 2022, there was a lot of Broken City, right? There was a lot of residual inspiration from what they did, from the kind of sparseness of their orchestration and some of their visual choices they make, whether it be drill or choreography. There's just sort of, it gets really kind of distilled out And even watching them, like, I mean, I had Mike on here and I love a lot of what they do, but even watching them themselves, at some point it kind of becomes like, I've heard the word parody. I don't want it to be super negative because I'm not shitting on Broken City. They're obviously great, but it's like there's like a predictability of it, but also like, so it becomes predictable, and I'm like, you're doing the same thing every year, and it makes me want to like shake things up, like exactly what you're saying. Like, can we create new ways to play with this medium? But then on the flip side is, unless you're in a certain place with your players, like a certain level of excellence, and then a certain level of clout as a designer or director, if you can't introduce something so new that people are like, well, I don't get it, so actually this doesn't work. Like we were talking yesterday, but it was like Broken City does that, and it's like, you're a genius because I'm so confused. But almost every other group does that, and it's like, I'm so confused, so you're an idiot and you don't know how to design. So it's like this really weird line where it's like, we don't want everyone to like be just being Rhythm X, B, C, and D, but also there's like this need to incorporate into the wave so that you can get recognized competitively. So it's like really tough, especially for those like lower and mid-tier groups that are like, well, I'm doing this and I'm not getting rewarded, or I'm doing this and not, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. And it actually, as you're talking, my anxiety levels started going up, and it made me realize why, not that you talking doesn't always make my anxiety level go up, but you like fair. But that makes me realize why this whole podcast world that's kind of, I wouldn't say it's erupting, but it's growing right now, is kind of on shaky ground. Like, I think of, if I'm watching the Celtics and the Warriors last night, they're like, the Celtics are like, fuck the Warriors. I hate them. I want all of their players to get injured. And they are rivals, and they don't care to get on screen and say, I don't like that other team. We, in our world, we're like our own niche, and we're family that are trying to create a whole activity. So
Yeah.
like, to say anything about Broken City, it's like, well, Mike and Kevin are like really close friends of mine. So,
Sure.
so that's like, I have opinions about all the other groups. Everybody does. And I'm sure they have plenty of opinions about Rhythm X, but it makes me realize why the podcast thing hasn't really happened. But your point about what Broken City did when they came in, and I think that they were able to shake things up because of their experience as designers and their super like mega high level of talent, that was difficult to break into for sure, but they were able to do it. But that their version of what they think indoor drumline looks like is very unique. And the 4 other groups that are in those other 29 independent world slots that now look just like Broken City, they are not succeeding, and they will not succeed. So my advice to those people, stop watching videos and stop trying to copy what successful people are doing, and find your own pathway to success. There's no way that, I mean, how many groups have looked like Mystique over the years? Yet Mystique is still the one that is consistently in the top 5. You can't, it's like, we did a show about this, I think, me and you, the copy of a copy of a copy.
Yeah. 14.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember.
and the third version of it's just not as cool as the original. But everybody wants to get points. So they're looking at ways to do that. And I think that the way to do that is to be unique. And if there's 29 independent world groups, man, judging that show is probably the hardest thing ever, besides maybe BOA semifinals. And when you stand out, well, you got to have the horses, right? You got to have the players. But if you stand out for whatever reason, you have at least a shot of getting out of the pool of people that all look kind of the same. So stop copying people.
Yeah, I'm like kind of, I'm torn because I'm definitely with that, like the copying thing. But then actually on the flip side is like, you're talking about knowing, like you were discussing when we're assessing an idea, that we're getting rid of ideas that have been done before. So it's like these people like that are copying, like the only reference point they have is what's come before. They're like, okay, this is like what's been done. I guess what we're distinguishing is like, I think you do need to do the research. Like it is important, like the having a knowledge of the history of our activity and like the design, I think matters. I would think.
True.
Though I think, you know, hyper awareness isn't always like super healthy. It can be good to kind of like, I know Mike Jackson doesn't really watch until the end. At least that's what he says, right? I think you need to have like a knowledge of the history of the activity, but then it's like making the decision to not just like, or it's either you're making a decision, you're going, we're going to literally do that. Like, I'm literally going to just do what this person did. Like, after Inspired, like the few years after that was almost like, dude, like I was so sick of it. I don't know how you guys felt, but it was like, man, like, can y'all just stop this? Like, stop. It's done. Like, let's take that and then let's like figure out something out. So like that moment, but like on the flip, it's like, do the people even realize that they're doing that? Like, I think it's almost a matter of like, do you think that these groups that are really copying, are they doing it in a way just to get points, or are they just like, I'm so inspired that I'm just gonna like, this is my like whatever. Like it's just odd. I don't know. Like some of these groups, like there's not a like substantial identity that differentiates them from everyone else.
Yeah, that is true. And I think that groups that are video watchers that end up looking like a copy of a copy, it is a double-edged sword because you can't really change the game unless you're at the top of the game. But a show like Inspired is a really good example of that, on two facets, I guess. One is that year, Tim and I especially, we tried to get inspiration from other things that were not drumline related at all. So like the running across the drums after that snare break that was a big hit, that came from Britain's Got Talent. It was a hip hop dance team that they all turned their backs and a guy ran across their backs, and we're like, that's pretty cool. How could we do that in our world? Or like we watched cheerleading videos and like when they started making triangles and pyramids and
Yeah.
it felt like we wanted to be inspired. You know, we had just come off of winning in '08 and '09 and wanted to kind of shake it up a little bit. And that did, the other facet of that is we did want to inspire other people. We didn't want to see copies of that show for the next 3 years, but we wanted to show people, yeah, you can go to your knee, or you can stand on this thing, or you can do this physical thing with your body. I mean, before 2010, did you ever see tenor lines go to their knee? No, they'd be like, "Oh, we can't do that. Our legs won't do that. Maybe for a one count, but like to get down there and go crazy, and stack people on top of each other and stand on instruments and just be, I don't know, trying to shake things up." I think that happened, but like you said, then the versions of that for the next couple of years.
Right, and it's like, that's natural, but it's tough, you know. Like I think GMU is an example. Like I'm not sure, we haven't discussed if you've like sat down and watched our stuff, but like from this year specifically, I feel that since 19-ish, we've kind of gotten our legs with our team, and every year we're just trying to go like, we're over here and then we're over here. Like we did a show with like a live rapper, and then we did like a cowboy show, and then this past year. And the Cowboy Show was like super maximalism, like set design, theatrical storyline. And then this year was like conceptual, you know, droplet that has ripples. And we've just been trying to kind of like be agile, like jumping and not trying to get stuck and like, this is the wave and like, this is how things are going. So we want to do that. And I think it's so tough because it's like, on one hand, I feel like, I hear from people, I'm not going to speak to it objectively because I can, but like I am being told that like GMU has its own identity separate from the people around us. And then on the flip side, it's like we have to figure out how to crack into the next level because we aren't just composing our shows like Pulse, you know, or we aren't just like trying to mimic what Rhythm X is doing exactly. So it's like, it's hard when you're in that space and you're like, where you like, it's this constant balance of like, I want to get rewarded, but I also like refuse to just be a mimicking what is succeeding, because it won't even work, right? Because you do need those players to do certain things, like period, right? And just the way that you construct a show. So it's a really tough thing, I think, and it, leads us to the conversation about like how the judging works, because it's like I guess like period is like these judges know all of our histories, and they know, oh, like for me, I'm like, what? Mason's been the last 5. I mean, I've been there for 7 years, but the last 5 have been like this huge upswing. But to a judge who's been judged for 10, they're like, well, Mason's that group that like didn't make finals and was like an open class group. Like we're kind of dealing with that. And it's like, is that a reality of judging that we all need to be more like transparent about? Because again, like we were discussing, the philosophy is show of the night, but like we know that it's not. So can we get beyond that and go, there's something more nuanced to how we can express the way that these opinions are coming out at the end of each season?
Yep, those are good. Your podcast is fun because you ask a lot of questions that make me think, and it's less autobiographical, which is nice.
Good.
So the tenths, right? Like how many tenths we have in between. You brought up a point about show of the night, and you said, and we all know that it's not. I don't think that that's true. I think that it is show of the night based on the spread guidelines in each caption. So you may not go from 9th to 3rd, but for a judge that's on that person's caption, the day before they may have had you 2 tenths down, and that fits in to that area on the sheets where it says could potentially change. If
Sure.
you're 7 tenths apart, probably not going to change, and they've given you that message already. So if you're in striking distance, yeah, it is show of the night where they may switch their minds, or you may be 2 tenths higher the next night. Show of the night doesn't mean that the spread guidelines might go from 9 tenths to 9 tenths the other way. So that's one thing about the judging that I think is a little bit of a misconception. About GMU, I will say I think that you're on the right path, even though it's probably frustrating. And if you look in that little area, there's a consistency in that area, just as there's a consistency in the top 5,
Right.
for many of the same reasons. And it seems to me that if you're trying to continually be different, and there's going to be a year where something's going to click, and you become, all you need to do is become that group that they then leave the arena and go, hey, you remember that thing, who's that group that did that thing? And whatever that thing is that's like really game changing or really extra cool, all of a sudden you're in the conversation, and then you start to move up. But you're not going to do that by being a facsimile of yourself every year and looking the same as yourself every year and being like marginally better, or more of whatever the thing is that you thought got credit last year, and you just do more of it. I don't think that's the way to make your way out of that middle. I don't want to say middle 5, but that area that's like 6 through 12.
Sure.
That has a lot of really amazing groups in there. It's difficult to make it out of that, but your pathway, it seems to be the one that may have the most potential for success. So stay the course, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, for sure. I feel like it's tough when you come out of a year and you see kind of Pulse really max out the box sixiness of themselves, and it tells portions of the activity that that's the way to do it. And part of that is not just what they do in a singular year, it's that they have this really specific formula to how they design and how they implement it that gets them really far. Like, they're amazingly clean. No one would ever debate that they didn't sound basically flawless from the box. I just wonder if there's like a suggestion when you see a group like that, and POW, honestly, and it tells maybe less experienced designers like, hey, just kind of do something and then like do it more and do it more and do it more, and then you'll like win. Like I wonder if that is somehow, not that Pulse shouldn't win, right? I don't necessarily think that was the record-setting show. I've said that on here before. And to your point, like with the podcast thing, like and everything that sort of has gone down since WGI, it's like I don't ever feel like I'm necessarily talking shit, but I do just like kind of say what my opinion is, and I don't know like that it matters if people get mad about it, because are we supposed to move in silence? Like, and I respect you're on the steering committee, as I said in the intro. So it's like, I do respect your kind of need to, be specific about what you say. And I certainly try to be specific about what I say most of the time. But also it's like, this is competitive. And I know you would probably agree, is like, I feel like there's a space for, criticism, or for, like you said with the Celtics, right? It's like, and after that game, there's like millions of there's all this discourse around it, and I personally welcome that discourse, because to get back to where I started with this is like, how else do these people who are kind of static, or who are like, I'm stuck in this place and I'm like oppressed by the system, which like I don't necessarily like fully believe, but I feel like these conversations like this one we're having right now, like people are going to listen to this and be like, I just got a really solid insight from two people that like we've never had this conversation publicly, or like this extended, right? So it's like, I feel like that's a place where the activity can grow. And, I don't necessarily think it should be limited. Like, I'm probably the only designer that has a podcast at the level that I am at. So I would welcome more dialogue and more discourse, so that people can wade through how the numbers come out, and like they're seeing at finals, and then understanding like, maybe I don't want to do exactly what Pulse does, because like they have these exact things that allow them to do that. And if I just take that framework and do it, it's not going to be the same, right? So that's how people grow, like through the experience of it. And I think that I sometimes feel like, and I'll end it here and you can respond, is like, I feel like we move in the background and there's not enough publicized information about like what we do, how we do it, and like why it looks the way it looks. I don't know where you would start with that.
Agreed. I'll start with Pulse, because they're a really great example. I think we talked about the process. Like, if we take RhythmX and Pulse and you take our two processes and put them together, they're literally apples and oranges. So in a basketball game, everybody has to play with the same ball and go to the same hoop and try to do the same. You still get 3 points if you go behind the line. All those rules are in place, where we don't really have those rules. And to their credit, a lot of groups will look at Pulse, like you said, over the next couple of years and be like, okay, that's what I should do. I need to write a really good show and make it really, really clean and have a lot of content that's going to get points on the score sheets. Like, on paper, that's very, very smart. However, you have to have really smart people doing that. So like, just because you write your show early and the kids have the beats like in their hands earlier, doesn't mean that the beats are good. Pulse's beats are great. So they have great beats right away, and their kids are great. And then they are great. If you try to just mimic their process, you're not going to get that same success. Which you brought up POW. They're a perfect example of that, because it's a lot of the same team. It's a lot of the same process, but it's not a winning show, because their students aren't at the same level. I talk a lot about Formula One, about having the best car. Mercedes always has the best car, and those drivers just have a flat out advantage before you even push the pedal. Mm-hmm. That happens. And there is something, you said, I don't know if it was a record setting score. I don't know if it was either, but it was amazing. And I think that the proof to the record setting score is I don't think that score belongs to Pulse. I think that score belongs to Independent World and how good it's getting, because that 15th place group, if they're already getting an 89 or a 90 or a 91, by the time you get to 5th place, and that group deserves a 96 or a 97, and it keeps pushing up, right? The better the groups in WGI Independent World get as a group, the higher that score gets. So yeah, they got that score, but everybody else pushed them there. Not that they didn't deserve it, but there's another dynamic in play there. I think that talking about the basketball teams, the interesting thing is we don't really beat groups, right? Like there is a winner, right? Pulse was first and Rhythm X was second, but I don't feel beaten. Um, we have all these other captions. Like I can point at the hundreds that we got in GE and be like, yo, actually, maybe we won. You know, we won what we wanted to do. Like we presented our show and got the product out that we wanted, and these people gave us hundreds for it. So, and they scored higher in other things. That's fine. But it's not like at the end of the year. I mean, how many show like we just talked about Inspired and how it like changed the activity, and that was a second place show. So that show
Right.
didn't get beaten. It didn't lose, right? It beat, so Art Shaped Box beat 27 other groups, but still lost. I don't think that's true, right? There's like, how many winners are there in independent world? There's 29. Like everybody's got a group that got to Dayton. You won.
That's a positive way to put it.
Thanks. It's true. It's true.
It is true.
Doesn't mean
That's
that
very
you want to not, doesn't mean that you don't want to get all the points, but there's lots of different ways to win.
For sure, I agree. And you know, I love the thought of like the shows that resonate are kind of, you know, and they all resonate. Like everyone has a different flavor, and like it makes me like there's like a few things that where it brings me. It's like I kind of just wish like we didn't get scored. Like I kind of wish it was just this big showcase, you know. Which, at the same time, I like don't really feel that way, but like it because like what you said, like there's no defense, right? So it's like how are you the fact that the judges are using the same criteria to judge Matrix and George Mason is kind of like unspeakable. Like it's one of those really weird things, or it's like. And then maybe that's what is good about WGI, because like as critical as I'm going to be and will continue being, as we all sort of need to be, I think the fact that Matrix can get like, you know, win Effect Viz and get 13th in music is like one of the good things that you see happen in WGI that you would never see in DCI ever, at least not these days. You wouldn't really make a call like that. And maybe that's like the nature of the beast, is like cores that are just operating a higher level. I don't know, but like I think Mark, and I think he would be right, would say like that's the system working. So in that regard, I think
that's true.
Yeah, and it must be tough to look at a group with $50,000 invested in lights and screens, and then look at a group with one prop that they break at the beginning of the show, and you got to sort of navigate that. And I wonder what kind of tools they're being given, and maybe you can speak on this, because I actually don't know, and I'm always wondering like the kind of training that the judges are receiving. Like can you talk at all about like that portion of it? Is it museums, exposure to like cultural touch points? Like how are the judges challenged year to year to stay in this contemporary moment? Because I think you would agree, I think independent world is maybe moving faster than the judges are. So like, how is this kind of being like maintenance year to year?
For the judging part of it, well, first of all, I want to correct you. You have two props in your show. I watched it last night, and there's a second prop at the end. So
yes, sir.
saying that you have one prop and it
breaks. Yeah, you're right.
And it magically got put together throughout the show. So, okay. Yeah. The judges' meetings are very productive. We've been a little bit dry on them because of COVID, obviously, and with budget cuts and trying to just make it through as an organization, a corporation. We've had a number of times where the steering committee, this is one thing that I think that we do really well, is that the judge reps that are on the steering committee, they come to the advisory board meeting. They have a voice. We can toss questions to them about judging. And then the director, designer, industry people who are also elected from the PAB go to the judges meeting. That doesn't happen in the other divisions. Well, it might happen in WINS. I know it doesn't happen in Color Guard. And there's been a number of times where we would do breakout sessions. So like I've got all the visual effect judges in a room, and we'll watch a show. and we don't watch our own shows usually. Sometimes we'll watch a little bit of one of our own shows, but as a designer, I can say here's some things that when I watch this show, I realize, oh, that person came out of that prop and I didn't notice how they got back there. That's somebody orchestrated that well. Somebody was smart to do that. Or do you feel how the weight of this has shifted over to this side of the floor, but now your symbol feature starts over here? Like, not that the judges don't know those things, but what I see when I watch a show, they're hearing those words as well. And I think that's really valuable. And the people that are on the steering committee, I think at the time it was Andrew and Keisha, Sean Vega, lots of people that can share information intelligently, and not have it be about our groups getting credit,
Right.
but just getting the judges to here's what designers are doing, because we're still in that weird evolutionary moment in our activity where our quote unquote top designers are still doing it. So we're not judging. Some of my favorite times, like I think SCPA does this great. Like I've judged out there a number of times, and they, as an organization, has said, well, we'd rather have Tim on the panel knowing full well that he teaches RhythmX and that in a week, these groups are going to be competing against RhythmX, because we want his information instead of the competitiveness of, well, he can't judge us because he's our competitor. I think that's really cool and really smart. Can't really do that at the WGI level. But I do think that it would be a fun experiment. This is one of my thought experiments that I've had, is that like take the top 8 designers from the year before and make that the panel, and just maybe for just the top 8, maybe not all 29 groups, but this would be a separate thing, a trial. And right. It's just like the Russian ice skaters, like you throw out your score for your group, and then you take the highest and the lowest one, whatever. And then that commentary and that score is probably going to be right. Like if you put me and Sean and you and Mike Jackson and Kevin and everybody and Shane all in a room, and we watch 5 shows, we're going to get it right. And the commentary that group is going to get, we're doing it with the overall design commentary, right? That's one thing that's definitely helping with that. And I think that at those regionals where it's available is a really valuable tool to people. But I would encourage groups to get more input from people. Like I do a lot of commentary videos for people throughout the year. I think there's a lot of groups that just get into their bubble and they rehearse their show, and then they get to finals and like, hope it's good. But you could be getting input from people that aren't judges throughout the whole season if you just seek it out. Like that 6 minutes of commentary that's in your competition suite shouldn't be the only input that you get. Like I always call it the mom test too. Like if my mom comes and watches the show, I watch her, and if her head is in the right spot, and if she like wants to clap at the right spots, then I'm doing the right things, because that means that I'm leading your eye correctly. Because if the snares start playing over here on side 2, but I left your eye over here, she doesn't care about the snare drums. So she doesn't like immediately turn her head like most of us would if the snare drums start playing. So that's one of the little tricks. Get more input from people that are designing in the activity, whether they're at the top or not, and use the mom test. Like it could be anybody. It has to be somebody that doesn't know the score and doesn't know the drill and doesn't know that the tenor feature is about to come up over here, so they start turning their head over there already. That'll help you like when you get to your first regional and you get those first set of tapes.
Yeah, it's always really, especially for us, because I'm jealous of you guys, because I know it's like your MIPO weekends, which is the local Ohio circuit to X for people listening. A lot of the shows now, which is like a cool thing for sure, is like you have like 4 or 5 independent world groups now in Ohio. Like Cap City, you guys, Matrix, Connexus. Whichever group Dave
Innovate. Yeah.
I think now it's going to be innovated again. Last I was informed, but you guys are getting kind of a read amongst, relative competitors in a way. For X, I think Matrix is probably the consistently closest one for the Ohio State Champ Trophy. But it's cool because y'all are competing. There is like this competition pressure and seeing other groups where like we don't really compete until we saw United and ID at the Jersey Regional. And I feel like that cultural aspect has really affected us because we're at the local reads for us at least like are just not really useful because the people are just like afraid, so it's all like this is perfect blah blah blah, and the numbers and the tapes don't make any sense, like it's just not great. And then the WGI reads, like they don't necessarily come through to the end. The conversations that we have are in one place, but when the comparison comes at the end, it's very different because there are 29 groups. And I think that is something like we didn't really account for or maybe didn't realize. And it's like, I don't know, I think maybe I was relying too much on like the judges at WGI being consistent for some reason, because like our two visual judges at New Jersey were like, if you guys keep at this, you're going to be in a conversation like up there with your visual numbers. And we're like, good, yes, we feel like what we're doing is like really special, like we don't have props, like it's really like based on the construction and the fluidity and seamlessness of it. And then at the end it was like, you guys don't have props, so there's no through line and there's no like storyline, and like we don't get it. That was like our effect visual tapes. Like this same caption was read so differently, and like again, like on one hand, that's absolutely the nature of the judges, is there's like an interpretation, there's like a lens for each person, and that they are trained to like lean into more one bullet more than the other. It's not just like the whole sheet being read the exact same way. But then on the flip side, it's like, what do I make of that as a designer, where I'm being told like this is exactly what you feel like it is, and then at the end it's just not. Do you just like, and this is more personal for me, it's like I'm just pursuing it rather than like, oh, I don't believe them, or it's just like a complicated place to be in.
Yeah, that's true. I think to your point about Ohio, that's not actually true. We have a lot of groups in Ohio, but Matrix and Cap City both compete in OIPA, which is a circuit that's up north. Fourth Wall or Innovate didn't come to our circuit. So MIPA is Rhythm X and Connexus.
Gotcha.
So and Connexus is a great group, but we're not usually directly compared to each other.
Right.
So we don't have that California vibe where we do have a big chunk of independent world groups that are like competing every weekend.
Right.
I will say what we do have though is that we have WGI judges every weekend. Chad Heine used to be Chris Heston, and now it's Chad Heine. They're our judge coordinators, and they do a great job of getting us really quality people every weekend. So I mean, like the very first weekend of the year, I'm getting at least WGI reads. And that does help. So I would say if your local circuit's not bringing that would be step one. Like you may not have a lot of competition, but if you've got the people that are maybe in the seats at championships, it also gives you multiple reads. I mean, Brett Kuhn was on one of our panels, and he didn't know a lot about Kurt Cobain, and he didn't know about the suicide, and he didn't know about, Courtney Love's, suicide letter at the end and all those things. And so he was kind of like, yeah, your show's good, I guess. And then we talked to him in critique, and he went home and he watched the documentary, and now he knew way more about it the next time. And just getting that chance to interact with the judges throughout the season. And I think California definitely benefits from that. I mean, they've got great panels their SCPA finals panel is as good as the WGI panel, or is the WGI panel. And they get critiques with those people. Yeah, maybe. So yeah, get your circuit to get better judges, or help train those judges to be WGI quality. That's the other thing, is that the WGI judges are a finite resource. And the local circuits have kind of stopped training judges. So I remember being in a room in Springboro High School in like 1999 or 2000, and it was me and like Tom Rarick and Chris Heston, and they were local judges that were getting trained. It was Andy Sanders at the time, and Mark Thurston was in there. and sat through, and we went through the sheets. We went through the spread guidelines. What does it mean when you give a group 3/10? We then went into critique. This is kind of a funny story, and sat in on the critique. And this was, like I said, 99. And Ralph Hardiman was one of the judges. And Ralph is obviously a legend. I think we have a better handle now on numbers management than we did back then. And there was like 3 independent world groups and three sub caption ties and 1 bottom line tie in his caption. And he like took a phone call during critique. It was like, is this what we're supposed to be doing? Like, and Mark and those guys are like, no, it's cool. Like, he always gets it right on the tape, but don't do that part where it was like University of Kentucky and Mystique tied, and it was like there was only 3 groups at the show. Yeah, It was crazy. But those people, like Chris Heston, is famous now and is like the best judge coordinator ever. And he was sitting in that room learning at the time, and so was I. I don't think we do much of that anymore because we now have this like hollowed ground of the WGI judging panel, and that's all anybody wants.
Yeah, I would love some younger judges personally, but so this is obviously a conversation. Like, I think a lot of the convos started, and getting you on here started with the whole, like, you know, if you're not in that circle, you shouldn't have an opinion on the judging comment that went down on another podcast. And you know, I think there is an issue or possibly a conundrum, because it's like, okay, like the podcasters or whatever that are saying their piece, and you know, they're not in the inner circle of whether it be judges or you know, designers or what have you. But then you have like judges themselves who they never marched or designed for an independent world group, and they made that entrance into the judging world, and now they're in it firmly, right? Or they're like, it's not really being questioned because they're like, once you're a judge, you can say you're a WGI judge. I judge independent world finals or what have you. So it's like, I think there's kind of an issue there where it's like how to connect or bridge between like the judges who are kind of OG and sort of have been doing it, but to be honest, really don't know what it takes. So they like takes to like put a show out and like get it to finals, like you said, one of the 29 or what have you. And it's like how to kind of refresh that. Maybe do we have an opportunity there? Because I do think like there is just going to be bias, period. If you've been judging for the last 20 years, then you know exactly which groups have been super strong. And it's like, we're never going to bring someone into the activity to judge that like isn't aware of that. But like, at least people who are maybe, I don't know, I don't want to say like will take risks. We have judges take risks, but I do feel, and I'm interested in what you think, is that I think we know which judges like who, and it shakes out that way. Like, I'll just say, I'm not going to like say it, you know, I think like Tom Rarick and Rhythm X, like I know there's like a relationship there. Like there's a certain thing when you look at how things shake out. Like, you know, I had someone tell me like, oh, Chad Heine and Scott Coder on the panel, like that's going to be trouble for you guys. It's like, should we know how a judge is going to feel before? Like, because I sometimes feel like there are surprises, but there's just so much preconception built into time that you can't like just remove out of it. So it's like, how do we get a little bit more like refreshing it, or like a little more objectivity? I don't know if it's like objectivity, but do you see what I'm asking? It's like, it would like infusing new blood or new perspective into the judging.
So I want to make sure that I'm clear. Rhythm X and Tom Rarick don't have a thing, right? He has his flavor.
Yeah, totally.
And your moment about Alinea, the year in 19, some of that was a reaction to his response to us in 2018. We did something different in 2018. The marimbas were moving around the floor, and it didn't have enough marimba content for him. That's totally his prerogative. And when the comparative analysis happens, if everybody's really good, sometimes you got to pick something and say, well, actually, this group, I don't think maybe this was at the highest level, so I'm going to put them in fourth, which, like I said, fourth is not losing, right? It's not. We didn't lose because we were fourth. That was still an amazing accomplishment. But in 2019, yeah, Andrew was like, "Fuck it, we're gonna do every texture. The marimbas are gonna play their ass off the whole time, and we're gonna get them back on our side. Like we're gonna show, like, yep, we can play that card too." But we don't want to do that for individual judges. That specific one, it's more of like, well, if somebody's saying this, they're not lying. They must really feel this. So we have to at
Right.
least accept and hear what they're saying and then put our show together. If we press the pedal a little bit farther in one direction, I think that's competitively smart. The judges themselves, I will say, have gotten way, way better in the last 10 years. I think Chris Heston and his leadership, it can't be overstated how good he is at his job. The fact that there are lots of judges that haven't designed, I don't know what the solution is for that unless we start quitting. Like if the people that are doing it start quitting and start judging, fine. But that I don't see it happening anytime soon. I mean, I know I'm like way older than a lot of the people in the room now at the PAB, but I still feel like mentally I'm still that 26-year-old like young gun that wants to just change the world. I just have a little bit more experience, and I don't. Why would I stop doing Rhythm X? Like Rhythm X is the coolest thing ever. So okay, yeah, I'm gonna stop and start judging, and then have all my friends get pissed off at me because I have them in fourth. You know, it's a tough sell. I mean, it's a tough sell. We say the judges aren't good enough. They need to design, they need to do this and this. But then if you judge, you get shit on all the time. And if you everybody hates you except for the group that you put in first. And that group that is in first is probably like, yeah, but not by that much. Like they could have had us higher. So you can't please anybody. So who do you want to get to judge?
I honestly think I think the every world class designer should be judging while designing. I have no issue.
Put a proposal in.
Oh my God!
Put a proposal in. We'll see what happens.
I think if you put me in the effect viz caption, I would make better tapes than are being made right now. I'll say it right now. Be true. I need some training. I would love some training, but I think I can reward what this is my thing, and like I'd love to hear what you think is like. We've got to stop the tapes where it's like you're doing this, but you should be doing this. Like these judges should just be like ultimately rewarding and looking for creativity and looking for what's different and looking for the quality. Like I don't feel like judges are able to differentiate quality group to group. I don't think they're able to differentiate vocabulary on many levels group to group. And I think they're constantly going, this is what I would do. Why would I care what you would do when you've never done this? That's the thing is like, what you shouldn't be saying, this is what I would do. You should be saying, here's what you're doing and here's why it works or doesn't work, maybe. But like, there's such a lack of analysis of the left side of the sheets where it's like, can you tell the compositional differences between these 10 groups? Because I can. Like, I could sit here and talk about like every group's different drill approach and like, I have this understanding, and so could you, like 100%. And it's like, could these guys sit there and go like, here's what makes Monarch different than POW, than Mason, than Matrix? Like, it's almost like they literally can't tell. Or possibly when it does come to the end, they're just trying to be so high standard. They're like, we're not going to like give you that. But then it's like, I don't learn anything from these tapes. When all you do is something like, I would have done this difference, like, you're the program coordinator at a DCA group. Like, what does that have to do with me? Like, tell me, what are we doing? Like, I'm not hearing you say the words that are on the sheet or, like, say the things that you're seeing and observing. You know what I'm saying? So, like, for me, that feels disappointing because it goes back to what we discussed yesterday on the pre-podcast is the tone of these tapes. Because for you, it's like, why are you going to go judge? But for, like, a lot of other groups, their relationship with the judging community is, like, you're not noticing me and I don't know what to do. And the tone of the tapes isn't actually teaching me anything. So I'm like stuck. That might not be me personally. I don't like really feel that way, but you can see how a designer in a certain place would be like, we need to refresh the judging because they're not even trying to help me and trying to help me grow, which I do feel like is something, there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I will, to your friend, give you some advice that if you talk in the room, I would add a couple words to those sentences and say certain judges or some
Yeah,
judges.
for
But when
sure.
you say the judges, then Chris Heston's going to be like, bro, like all my judges aren't bad. And
No.
then it'll be awkward. So don't do that. And I don't want to see the two of you get in a fight. Well, I mean, I kind of do. But the fact that there may be some judges on the panel that have less experience, we do have some really good judges on the panels. So we have to
100%,
allow
yeah.
for that to be true. And if you are able to put those top 10 in order, maybe next year Mason gets 9th and 10th again and you get pissed and quit, and then you can judge. And it'll be great. We'll solve like two things at once. But I know that's not going to happen. Here's one thing that I do think we haven't talked about the 3-tiered system. So A, open and world, it's supposed to be coach, counselor, critic, where a lot of
Right.
people use teacher in the A class, where you're really teaching. Like at the A class, you should not have orange buckets on the floor. Like we can see your orange buckets, or it might work better if the snare line didn't take such big steps, whatever. Counselor and open class, that happens. And then it's ostensibly in world class, that's where they get to be the critic. I think that we've gotten big enough in independent world now that we may need to revamp that system and like reapply it to that class. Where of those 29 groups, I don't think that you need to be the critic of every single one of them and just be looking for errors. I think
Right.
that the bottom part of independent world class could probably use some coaching. And just because they're world doesn't mean that they don't need some help. And that the middle part, it might be more about counseling. And then at the top, it is more of a critic. That concept has come up a couple times. We talked about that word critic. I don't really love it. Like, I think that it means that their first instinct is to look for errors, and
Yeah.
it predates, like, goes back to the tick system. Like, this thing doesn't work, and that sounded bad because I'm supposed to be the critic. We've brought up using the word colleague, that we're, as colleagues, I'm evaluating what you're presenting, and we'll discuss it together. And like you said, here's what you're presenting. Here's, I think that it may work or may not work. But you're 100% right. I definitely don't like it when I get tapes that say, I would have done this, or you should do this. That pisses me right off when somebody tells me what I should do. Like, no, I'm doing what we should do. You might not like it, but this is definitely what Rhythm X should do. And if it's not, then Rhythm X the next weekend will change it. But don't tell me what we should do. Sorry, that pisses me off.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think certain judges, some judges, is way better than the judges.
Yeah, if I said that, it's just because I speak in absolutes and exaggerate and things like that because I live in a cartoon world. So, you know.
Yeah, well, as your colleague, I'll draw in some of the lines in your cartoon for you.
Yeah, I need editors
because I want success for you. Yeah.
No, I mean, and to be honest, like I don't feel I don't think I am one of those people right now sitting there going like me versus the judges. Like, to be honest, dude, like I love Mason. I loved what we did. It was what we should have done.
Yep.
And so I don't have currently, like, I'm not in that rebellious, like, stage of like all the judges this. Like, I feel that we can do better with some of the people evaluating us. And I feel like I'm at a point where I can help guide that conversation now, having experience and consistency in independent world finals. You know what I mean? Because now I've had this consistent presence with these two groups. So like, it's from a place of like constructive criticism for sure. And I feel like that's the relationship that should be happening, where it's like, I'm providing constructive criticism to the judging community, and they're providing it to me. And even a critic, for me, it's like choose the tone wisely. Like I don't feel like for I don't go in a room even if we get blown up and I'm like huffing and puffing and throwing shit. You know what I mean? And it's like as a critic, if you're the judge or whatever, it's like there's a certain rapport and there's a certain method of communicating. I don't think has anything to do with how good or bad of a judge you are. It's like the type of person you bring to it. Because to go back to it, is like these students are making life changes to be in these groups, and then you make a tape that's dismissive, and it's very counter to like the overarching umbrella of, I think, especially WGI, right? I think WGI is doing such a great job with that. So it's like, there's certain individuals, and I've got to think though, on the flip side, if I were a judge, what I would say to myself is, well, guess how many directors and designers come into the room and flip out? There's probably a lot,
Yep.
right? So I'm sure it goes both
Yep.
ways, but I just, I just want to, for me, I want every tape to be playable for the students. So the students could hear it and they can take something away and learn something, like more than myself. Because I know if I'm not getting anything, they definitely aren't. And there are times where it's like, this doesn't really feel playable.
Yeah, I agree with that. And your podcast with Omar, he talked about that, about making sure that his tapes or his commentary was playable for the students and the staff, and like maybe the superintendent hears it. And I think he's great at that. So one theory that I have too, that I think a lot of people don't consider is like, let's take the 29 independent world groups. There's a top and there's a bottom, right? They're all world-class groups, but there's a range that goes all the way through, right? If you take the 40 WGI judges, they should have that same range, right? You put 40 people in there. We could list who the top 5 judges are right now. I'm not going to do it, but we could say, here's that top 5, and then it does this. But I think that as a community, we acknowledge that there's 29 different placements and some of them are better than others, but we want every judge to be Pulse. We want every judge to be RhythmX and to be giving perfect quality commentary that's playable for the kids. Yeah, that should be the goal, right? But shouldn't it be the goal that all 29 independent world groups are perfect? Yeah, it should be, but it's not. So we got to allow for a little bit of humanity in the roster to know that we're going to get some variance within that they're not all going to be 99s out of 100.
Yes, and if the top 15 directors and designers were all called on to judge, that whole thing would be like this. We would like get rid of the bottom quartile and the quality would be better. So I do think like, even let's say it's just at regionals that they're like, all right, Tim Fairbanks is judging or Andrew is judging or Kevin Shaw is judging or what have you. Like, even if it's not at finals, they just do regionals where their groups aren't competing. I think that would be massively helpful because it is tough when you don't know what you don't know and you're not seeing a single super high level group or judge until the end. It's such a surprise. Whereas if you had a judge like Scott Coder or someone like that early season, all of a sudden it's like you're getting reoriented really quick in what you're doing. So there is a resource and like geography logistics issue that's like within this conversation we're having about how we make everything better. Is just like we're all kind of splintered away, and like that affects what things feel like until we come together, and then it's like, oh, this is actually where we're at, and if you're like, the funny thing is I'm probably one of the younger people, so when I say young designers, I like don't know who I'm talking about, but I would think like greener, newer designers, maybe I am in that, but like, so I just think people are stuck, and it's like, how do we help those people? If people's relationship, let's say like someone's relationship with the judging community broadly, or some of the judging community is in a place where they're like, I can't take more than one step at a time. Like, how can they improve what they're doing? This is like a legit question. This is not like, how can they do it? But it's like, not, it's like, how do individuals in those positions who feel like they're not really getting a solid read for whatever reason until the very end, you've recommended, getting consultations. I think that's spot on. Even a video consultation is going to be better than nothing. I think that's a good one. what other ways, do you kind of elevate what you're doing if you're living in Mississippi and there aren't, great access to judges at your local level?
The idea that you just had about having designers, or not necessarily designers, but directors or groups, representatives, judge at regionals. I think put a proposal in. Like, why not? Like, if I go to the East Coast Regional and I don't have to do
Please.
overall commentary, I could actually just judge. Like watching your show last night, I was like, I kind of would have loved to run a tape on this in like March, just to give you some input,
Yep.
and put down a score and defend it. And then whoever the other visual judge is, we're now in the van and we get to talk about things and communicate. What did you see as a judge or as a designer? We both did the same job today. That has some legs. I don't know if you're going to get that many people to leave their group multiple weekends of the season, but it could be it. Like I think it was this year. Maybe it was one of the COVID years, but I judged one of the local shows. Like it was like last minute, somebody couldn't make it,
Yeah.
and my groups were there, but they were like, will you judge the show?" I was like, no problem. And those critiques were great. Everybody was into it. And if anything, I was more critical on my own groups.
Definitely.
I also judged a color guard show this year. Like I did a full day of color guard, and as a visual effect person, that opens up my mind to what the other activities are doing. That just being at the drum show all day long is sometimes detrimental to your health.
Yes, like literally physically it is, but also to your perspective on
Yeah.
what's going on. But yeah, we can talk. I don't know if the proposals are closer this year, but I would, at least for a weekend, I would kill. Like I actually had a SCPA gig lined up in 20, which I am super disappointed COVID came exclusively for that reason, amongst others. But I just feel like
It
that
came
would
for
be,
you exclusively.
yeah, it was like you're about to pop off and judge SCPA. Nope.
Nope. Bring in the bats.
and
It's funny.
it's a great learning tool. Yeah, seriously. But I feel like it's a great learning tool for me. Like, I love judging because I'll judge a high school and I'll be like, damn, like I learned things about what I should be doing with Mason. You know what I mean? So like, and it honestly, if you judge and then you're a designer too, you know how to talk and you understand what happens when the numbers go down. You can like create that narrative. I feel like some designers don't judge at all, so they really don't have any empathy. So for me, that's been huge. I got my foot in the door with judging years ago, so now I do judge visual effect primarily, and it's just massively helpful. It's like a huge learning tool. But if I could go judge MCM in the middle of the season, I would kill for that. Like, to get paid to do it would be great, but I think it would be good for MCM to hear a tape. I'm guaranteed they would appreciate that, and it would be that like, rising tide lifts all ships type deal where it's like, we get these people. I don't know if Tim J would ever do it. I don't know if does he judge?
A little bit.
So he would, yeah, I would, so many people, we could just list everyone. Great. Ian Grom is going to come judge music at the Jersey Regional. It's going to be better for all of us because as long as we do it in a way that's authentic and genuine, I don't think anyone would be sitting there and be like, oh yeah, this is terrible, but it's actually great, and they're like trying to sabotage you. That's not anyone's goal. Like we all hate bad drum lines and we all hate bad design like that. We're trying to like help each other, right? So I would love to do that just for the personal education as well as just kind of making everything better. But that being said, I would love to just kind of ask your opinion in this format about the proposals. I have them in front of me. This year is kind of interesting because there's only 4 proposals, and I think like 2 to 3 of them are not actually rules. They're just like people getting penalties and wanting to like create some kind of protocol. So that's not like super interesting at all. But like obviously the one I want to just ask about is the age out elimination. This is from Mason. Travis submitted this, obviously with my blessing, and I read through this before it went up. But we have had extended dialogue on this, I feel like, even going back a few years. And this is one of those interesting ones that always gets people really fired up. Even though I would argue eliminating the age out wouldn't affect groups that don't want to take students over 22. Like, it's not a compulsory rule. It's like a choice that you would make, right? But I'll just quickly read the verbiage, and I would just love to hear kind of your response. But basically it says eliminate the age limit for percussion independent world immediately. This proposal is submitted with the well-being of all independent and scholastic classes in mind. Increase group participation and income from auditions. More PIW auditionees pivoting to opportunities in open and A. Professional development opportunities for educators looking for more experience. Stronger independent world groups positively influencing local primary, secondary music school ed. Post-secondary education and military service would no longer make participation impossible. Higher percentage of members who are financially stable. WGI remains an education first activity that primarily serves young people. And then no tangible fallout. Guard has had success in the same approach. And then the last little spiel is considering current national trends. Now is a good time to increase inclusion by revisiting this convo. Any ensemble that has a fundamental disagreement with this proposal will be free to impose their own age limit, which we have already seen in drum corps and indoor. Like Mason, you have to be 18. And then the responsibility of appropriately vetting applicants will still be the responsibility of the individual group. So this is pretty, I think this is a divisive type of topic. So I'd love to hear just your take, because I know that you have a perspective that you've kind of put together on this over time.
I do. I think that both sides of the argument have valid points. One thing I'd like to point out is that the percussion age out rule isn't something that percussion imposed on their division. When we became a division, we adopted the color guard rules, and the color guards had an age out. They had an age out rule just like DCI. And so we did the same exact thing that the color guards did. Historically, then that changed. Color guards started to decrease in numbers. There was a big push to make sure that all the international groups could compete. And they changed theirs. And have then altered it a little bit based on what class you're in over the years. And percussion didn't change it. So it's not something that we've ever added to our rules, right? Mm-hmm. I do think that inclusion is an interesting one. I think that that's a smart sentence to put in there to try and kind of garner some support. But I don't think that ageist is something that you can really... I mean, you can't be 24 and be in Centerville's high school, right? Like, there are periods of time where you can be cut off and say, okay, you're now too old to do this. It happens in sports all the time. Every gymnastics group, or cheerleaders, like, they're all 13 to 16 and then 17 to 18 and whatever their age groups are. So they're competing against age appropriate competition. The finances, I like that one. I like the idea that there would be more students that would be financially stable. The well-being of scholastic groups, that's the one where I prickle up a little bit. I think that it might be good for some independent groups. I don't think that it would be good for scholastic groups. I know that my biggest argument has always been the teachers. I've had weekends where I'm at Centerville and I have a full tech staff that is all recently aged out from Rhythm X, and they're 24, 25. They can live on a tech staff salary. They don't have a full-time job yet. They're techs, right? If they were still marching, they wouldn't be there on the weekends. And my wife, Jody, she teaches the color guard, and it has literally happened where in February, a local color guard that's all age, right, independent world, has 3 spots open up, and 3 of her staff members took those spots and filled those holes for the rest of the year. So now it's the first regional, and she's standing with the guard literally by herself. Like I've got 10 staff members, I've got like a posse of people behind me, and she's standing there like, well, I guess I'm running the guard today by myself, and I got to do rifle basics and warm up, and I got to run the flags, and I got to do the across the floors that my techs would normally be doing. And so the lack of teachers at the scholastic level, I think, is potentially tragic. That's a big one. The other one is the Dan Shack story, right? Like if Rhythm X doesn't have age outs, then the 2010 snare line all comes back and they're amazing again. And we don't have 8 spots that open up. And Josh Brickey doesn't call you and Travis and Tom Gasparini and say, yo, come from out east, change your lives, come to Rhythm X. We've got spots open because 8 people aged out. Otherwise, you just stay wherever you were. And in this podcast, you referenced 2 or 3 times on what it changed your life by coming to Rhythm X and how it changed your design process. And are you the superstar that you are now if we don't have age outs? Maybe, maybe not. It would be sad if we would lose somebody like you or Travis because you never got that opportunity to come to Rhythm X because we didn't have age outs and the 2010 snare line is still marching.
Yeah, couple good things in there for sure. You know, me personally, if I was a high school director and that happened, I would have just fired them and just tried to find new people because I think that's kind of ridiculous, but I know what instance you're talking about, so we didn't need to get too into that. But, you know, like that's fair, like the hypothetical thing, like, but also like that already happened, you know, so it's not like butterfly effect, like, oh, we're going to change the age out rule and that's going to change the course of history where like I'm no longer me and you're no longer you and blah, blah, blah. Like that did, like we are through that phase. So it's like, this is just a different phase. And while hypothetically, yes, it could lead to people losing opportunities to march, I think that is possibly true. But there are so many factors and different variables that lead someone to get a spot or not. And like that feels like just one possibility of a million to me. So like, yeah, for me, sure. Like, you know, if I couldn't outdrum Chris Gary at that time, then I don't deserve to march. You know, if you ask me, I would have beaten out some of those fools who made it, but that's just my attitude around it. Maybe not everyone in that line would have, but I probably would have. So that's just how I would come at it. But you see my point. I mean, like that is definitely true, but there's also all the people that hypothetically could march but can't because they're in college and they can't afford to do it. They can't take time off to move out right now. They are in military service for whatever reason. There are certain countries with compulsory military service. I think we talked about this a few years ago that literally disqualifies people from certain countries to ever be in WGI in America. So that feels like a disappointment. So, and I would also wonder for WGI percussion, independent world at least, I don't see a student being 24 the norm or being 27 the norm. I see it being an anomaly that would help groups like Mason fill out their kind of peripheral spots that we need to work through to fill out. So I don't even know, like, I would think Rhythm X is looking for fresh blood. Like, to your previous point, could you have kept David Oriente? Yeah, I mean, he's chopped to the fullest. Like, but are you going to keep all those guys who are like old, they can't march drum corps anymore? Or do you want like the young blood with like fresh legs? So I think that possibly comes into the conversation too, because sheer years of experience isn't always a positive when it comes to drumline because your body starts breaking down. So I would think you want those people that are you're in that strike zone where you're like, I'm doing tour, I'm doing indoor, I'm at peak physical condition, I'm under 22 years old. These people, like I know people who are like just aged out, like our bass tech at Crown and Mason, literally just aged out. His body, he's like a 6-year vet, and he couldn't march if we paid him. So it's like I don't necessarily think like every single student that could march would because their knees, their hips, and many people's lives are going to take over. People are going to choose to. Some people are going to have families. Some people are going to have jobs. Like there's so many different ways that people's lives go. I see this more as filling in these like gaps rather than like the whole independent world thing turns into 25 through 30-year-olds. Because honestly, I just don't think those are the best people. On average. I think on average, the best people are 18 through 22 because of drum corps. I would also argue I don't
So
necessarily. Go ahead. Go ahead.
let me ask you this. Do you think
Yes.
if we took the age out rule, if we took the rule away, do you think that Pulse and Rhythm X would get competitive later? Or do you think we would stay about the same?
Would you get more competitive?
Yeah, would Pulse be more perfect than they were this year if there was no age out?
No.
Okay. So earlier you said this rule would help groups like Mason fill out those other things. Any proposal that's self-serving for one group over another shouldn't get voted on, shouldn't get passed. So if it helps one group and it doesn't help another one, the community shouldn't vote for that.
That's interesting. Why? Why? Is that theoretical, or are you saying like that is what happens?
Yeah. No, yeah, that's my theory.
Right.
That's anytime that proposals have baggage, like you could say, we want to have a rule that lets everybody within Ohio get a travel stipend, or that's outside get a travel stipend or something.
Right.
Anything that benefits one group over another. Just philosophically, we tend to not think that that's fair. We as the PAB, you stop representing your group and you are representing WGI, and you should be voting on things like for the good of the entire activity. And if it doesn't benefit Pulse to change this rule, but it benefits Mason, then we should say no to that. But like my version of this too, I have kind of a funny story, is that I really believe that theory that once you get into that room, I'm representing WGI, right? And you referenced earlier, I'm on the board of directors, I'm the vice president, I'm on the steering committee, like all that stuff. All that stuff happens regardless of Rhythm X. Like I never say the word Rhythm X when I'm in a board of directors meeting.
Sure.
Never, it just can't ever come up. So like the 1 year in 2017, I proposed a rule to allow any instrument. Right? I thought that was the right thing to do so that all three divisions, because you can have color guard and percussion in a winds group. You can have winds and percussion in a guard group, but in drumline, you can only have guard. You can't have winds. And I thought that that wasn't equitable across the divisions. I proposed it. It passed just barely, which then made Mike do his 6633 proposal, which is great also. But then the very next year, All the World's a Stage year, 2018, we got beat by a show with a fucking trumpet in it. I didn't use the rule. I just thought it was the best rule for the activity to allow for some more creativity, and ended up getting beaten, right? Quote unquote. I've said that you're not supposed to be able to get beaten, but we were second to a group that used a trumpet, and it was really cool. So you have to think that everything that you propose or that you stand behind affects every group equally.
Yeah, no, I said no to Pulse because I just think they like kind of have their shit figured out. But like, I think it would, first of all, and I think that when I said it would benefit a group like Mason, what I'm trying to say is I think it would broadly benefit everyone, but through a more like literal approach with portions of these groups. And here's what I'll say about things benefiting one group more than the other. I guess like it's a tough conversation because it's like, well, like there's certain inequities to where all these groups are cloistered, right? Like in the West Coast, there's this heavy volume of talent coming out of a high level culture of high school drum lines, a music education system that is supporting all of that. Same with Ohio, like you guys have these insane band rooms with perches and Texas and Florida, and it's like where we start from is not equal, and that's no fault of WGI's, but like I don't necessarily think that means we just go like, no, everyone's equal, independent world, because like we're not, right? Like our ability to choose students is different when we aren't in an area that has indoor drum lines and has an exposure to it in general. We're like in a complete desert, right? So it's like, I get that. I do understand, like, from an approach and philosophical standpoint, it's not wise to be like, this is good for Mason or this is good for, like, but I don't see how it would hurt Pulse if they could have Zach come back and be their center snare. That would be badass, assuming his knees work or whatever. That's great for them if he wants to do that, or he can teach or whatever. That's my thing. Is it's literally up to every group. So it's like my body, my choice type deal. Like, you don't have to have older people, but you can if you need it, because I don't believe that we are all on the same starting point. So, and maybe that is okay, but I think that's a factor we don't necessarily have to like pretend isn't there.
I agree. I think that we're all at different starting points, and everybody has their own inequities. And if Mason gets super, super cool and people, it's a destination that they want to go to, and people move and go there like they do for Rhythm X. I mean, the Ohio system is not great. Like, we're not just churning out. We Centerville has a larger band room, but our middle school system is tragic. Like, we're teaching our kids from ninth grade from zero. So, like, some of those sweeping generalizations, we don't have all the advantages. We also have to pay 50 grand a year to rehearse inside every weekend. We don't have tennis courts that are outside. We also don't have to fly, right? We also don't. We get to listen to what it's like inside all the time. Like, all those things, you were never going to make it fair for every group. But I don't think taking away the age limit somehow makes it fairer for everybody. I think it makes it better for some groups.
Do you think it hurts the groups that are already kind of fine, that already have strong kind of recruiting pools and things like that? Like, would that hurt Rhythm X?
No, it wouldn't. But if you take it like this, if you take the top 10, and it's not going to hurt the top 5, but it's going to help the next 5, and maybe that pushes it up. And that's a reason that United now has 28-year-old kids in their snare line, and now they're 4th instead. That's inequity. I don't think it's going to hurt us, but we're pretty much, like you said, stacked already.
Yeah, I think the 28-year-old thing doesn't work, though. I don't think the 28-year-old is the best player in the line. I think the 20 and 21-year-old who's in the midst of their drum corps peak chops, I've got to think that it's still that strike zone. And when we're talking about this, we're talking about like kids who are, for some reason, like didn't hit that, but maybe they're 24, 5, 6, like that. And that's like a few of the kids like that. Again, you know, like we're trying to like speak in generalizations and avoid them as well. But like those are students I could see like, and it's a very small margin. Like, you're done with college now, but you want to go back in March. Like, we've had some kids do that. You know, you've had all these different instances. And I think a great example was this year with 2022. We had like a 24-year-old. It didn't matter. It didn't really make a difference. So we could also get into like the base age. Like, I kind of think that independent world should have a base age of 18 just with where things are at culturally. But I just don't necessarily think it's like the groups are going to be filled out with 30-year-olds who are all like the best players. That just feels like that's not really the reality of how being a snare drummer works, you know, or being like a percussionist with the level of chops that we're looking for kind of happens.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think that would happen either. And I think that if your rule proposal was to keep the age out as it is right now, where we added 2 years to it, it would have 95% more chance of passing.
Good to know. Noted.
Which you can amend proposals, right? You can amend proposals as long as it's on the floor.
For sure. I'm interested. You know, I think it's like, to maybe summarize, it's like, I think it's just good that maybe this proposal can generate a dialogue between people in your seat and people in my seat. Like, if nothing else, like, I kind of don't care if it passes, but like, I think what's important is that like you as someone in that winner circle, who people like the top designers, right? Like, which, what does that even mean? But it's like, if you are willing to have a conversation about this, we can at least educate each other, right? Because we are in a certain position, you're in a certain position. Not that you haven't been in it, but I think you spoke about in the Age Out podcast was like that moment where you just had to be there. That's like that outliers thing. Like there's the time you put in, but also there's the wave of hitting it at the right time. And I think we're in a different wave. Like I marched for you 10 years ago, right? So now this is a different generation, and it's like we're just in a different place. Like I don't think that when you were 32, WGI was the way it is now, right? So I think reassessing and having these conversations and bridging like generational divides, bridging like experiential divides, that has to be healthy. Like I don't really care what happens. Like I think that's good. So as long as like that inner circle and the representatives of WGI and respectively around that are like, we can have this conversation in a manner where it's productive, like that is what matters, because that obviously has not always been the case with this specific proposal. Like I think this is the one that pisses people off. They go like, why are we even talking about this? Like, well, is my existence valid? You could just say that it's not. You know what I mean? Like I think that sometimes feels like the mood to people who are still trying to crack in. How do I get in? It's like you get in by shutting up. Like that's just not really, like I just don't believe that. And I think you as a person who says your opinion, you are able to articulate things, complex things really well. Like if you never spoke up, where would you be? You know what I'm saying? Like, so I just feel a need to press on that so that we can keep moving this thing forward.
I agree with all of that, Dan. I do. And I especially agree going into the PAB, if anybody's listening to this, this happened the last time we had a PAB in 2019. And this came up, and I don't remember who it was, but somebody was like, oh God, this topic again. And it just kind of got like shut down. Totally not cool. So like for any of the OGs in the room, let people talk. Everybody has a right to their opinion. And I think like even just talking about it right now, neither one of us raised our voice, like we're not arguing, we're just talking about it. But there have been times where somebody will stand up in the room and be like, no, it's got to be this. It has to be this. Anybody voting for this is dumb, and it's just done. But that person might be famous enough that everybody's like, oh, shit, okay, I'm not going to vote for this anymore. And it has to be a dialogue. And there are points about it that I have some wiggle room on. Like I'm not like, no to the age out rule, period, end of discussion. I have my reasons for thinking that we should keep it or not open it completely up. And I think everybody should be open to listening to everybody else's opinion, especially since there is, like you said, a new wave. One of your questions was like, where do you see yourself in 10 or 20 years? I kind of see myself still doing the same thing. But there's more people now, and we have to value everyone's opinion equally.
For sure. Tim, this has been great. This is awesome. I feel like I'm ready to get into the PAB and hear everyone out. And this is super informative too. Like I feel like you just put on a very high value clinic on some subject matter that people really need. And it's cool to hear your perspective on things that like I think I kind of understand, and sometimes I do, and sometimes it's different, but it's always super insightful to hear how you look at things. So hopefully we can do this one again, because I'm sure we could probably keep going for 2 hours, but we're kind of at our time window. So everyone, be back soon. Check this out. You'll be seeing what happens at the PAB and everything, but Tim, thank you for coming and stopping by.
Yep, Dan, I appreciate the podcast. I appreciate you.
Awesome, man. Appreciate it. See y'all later.